Hey there, everybody. Yeah, it's your good pal Dustin back with another Sunday episode. I'm not going to call this one Turn It Around because I'm not counting it as an actual episode. This is just the intro to the next Bible study we are doing, and I will tell you what that is in a minute. But I wanted to kind of give a little reasoning behind why I'm doing this particular one. But first, as always, I hope everybody had a wonderful and blessed Sunday. I hope you got to worship God and spend time with God in whatever way that is for you, whether it's going to church, reading your Bible, singing along to Christian music, or watching YouTube or TikTok Christian content. Whatever way you spend time with God, hope you got to do it today, and I hope you get to do it throughout the rest of the week. And I hope you have a wonderful and blessed week ahead. So, as y'all know, because I told you, I went on vacation a few weeks ago. And while on vacation, I got inspired to do this one. I had to look and find a Bible study, hoping it's not going to be as difficult as it seemed to me on first glance. Maybe, first glances, you don't always get the full picture. Anyway, while we were on vacation, Mom and I went and saw a show. We went to a tourist town that has a bunch of shows. As dinner show things, where you eat dinner while you watch a show, etc., etc. We went to a Christian religious show, and it was about a person that I don't think is talked about too much or taught about too much. I know I don't hear a lot about this particular person, biblical person. I knew they existed, but I didn't know much about their story, and how and why their story is included in the Bible. It's one of those things. They aren't taught as much as other biblical characters, like Daniel, King Solomon, of course Jesus, the apostles. They just aren't mentioned. I think their book's rather small. In fact, with the Bible study that I found calls it a novelette. But we'll get into that. But anyway, we went and seen the show. The show was wonderful. The show was great. It was a musical. The music was great. Everything was just chef's kiss. And it dawned on me while watching this show that this person needs to be talked about more. Their story needs to be talked about more, because even though God isn't specifically named in their book, and by that I just mean they don't use the word God or Yahweh or any of his other names, but it still shows God's hand, shows God's providence, his love, and the love that we should show to other people, in my opinion. So, with all that being said, I present to you the story of Esther. The story of Esther. That is the next Bible study we're doing, and that is the show that my mom and I went and seen. It was called Queen Esther. Now we'll get to it. Anyway, so I just wanted to do a little wanted to give you a little story about why I'm doing this, and then of course give you a little intro into the setting, what what's going on at the time, etc., etc. Um, so, if you don't know, at one point in history, God sent the Jewish people into a 70-year exile into Babylonia. He did this because of the idolatry and, you know, the Jews were worshiping other things that were not God. So, as punishment, he caused them to be conquered, he caused them to be exiled to Babylonia. Now, during this time, God did raise up many people to kind of help and guide the Jewish people back to God. You know, there's Nehemiah, there's Ezra, Zerubbabel, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and a young woman by the name of Hadassah. Now you're like, well, wait a second, I thought we were talking about Esther. Well, Hadassah is Esther. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. And in order to keep her safe, she and the family she had gave her the Persian name of Esther. And now, while Nehemiah, Ezra, and Zerubbabel, they're important figures in the return of the Jews to their lands, the reclamation, all of that. But if not for Esther, it is questionable whether they would have been able to do what they did if not for Esther's courageous and selfless acts of love for her people. The book of Esther, like I said, it's rather unique as it reads more like a novelette. That's a short novel if you don't know. So, you know, right now I am reading this. I don't know if you can read it. It's a fantasy book by R.A. Salvatore. It is called The Demon Spirit. You know, fantasy, you know, demons are used a lot in fantasy as, you know, antagonists, especially, like I said, in fantasy settings. I love R.A. Salvatore. I love fantasy. It takes me to a different place. And that's what usually, when you read a novel, that's usually what happens. And Esther, its story is as gripping as any story you or I would read today. Now, whether you prefer sci-fi, fantasy, or romance, excuse me, Esther is a book that is gripping and full of God fulfilling his promises. By that, fulfilling prophecy, you know, all that kind of thing. It is full of God fulfilling his promises, God showing his love to those who keep his commandments, keep the faith, and keep their eyes on him. So the events of Esther take place in the time of Xerxes I, the king of Persia. That was around 486 to 465 BC. You know, somewhere around that. We'll say give or take a few years. Either way. So during this time, Xerxes was king. If you know any kind of, you know, ancient history, you know Xerxes is also the Persian emperor that I'm pretty sure, if I'm remembering correctly, is the Persian king that fought against the Spartans, the 300. Actually, historically, I think it's more like 3,000, but you get the point. And he was stalled and ultimately pushed back, arguably mainly due to the Spartans. And he had to retreat from his campaign to conquer Greece. So, you know, that's So you know he's already pretty angry because he lost. When you lose, you get a little upset. But when you lose and it causes the deaths of many people, even though they're soldiers, and that's what that's just kind of what they sign up for, is that possibility. You're going to be upset not only at your failure, but also of all the death that failure caused. Now, maybe you don't show that outwardly. You maybe blame your generals or blame your soldiers, but deep down, I think any military commander, when they lose, when their plans fail or backfire, and many of their soldiers are killed, I think that weighs on them. Might not be something that they express outwardly, but I believe that it still weighs on them. So, anyway, but the events of the book, specifically the book of Esther, it takes place over a 10-year span from about 483 to 473 BC, and historically would likely fit between the events of Ezra chapters 6 and 7. So now you're probably thinking, well, if God's not mentioned, why is this even included in the Bible? Well, there is another book that does not mention God specifically, and that is the Song of Solomon. So the Song of Solomon and Esther do not mention God by name, using the word God, using the name Yahweh. It just doesn't. Why? I couldn't tell you. But they don't. But that does not mean that we cannot see God in those books. Because despite that, in Esther, we can see God's hand of providence more clearly than in most others. And I'm sure we will see that as we go through the study. Like always, I kind of am going to be learning with you, because obviously a show is going to be dramatized more than what it would probably be in the actual book, to make it entertaining for a live audience. But in Esther, we see Satan's attempt at ending Jesus' family line thwarted, and we see the sovereignty of God despite mankind's evil intentions. Assuming what I saw on the show is what happens in the book, over dramatized, at some point in the story, this official tries to kill all of the Jewish people. Obviously, that doesn't happen, but we'll get to that as we go. But we also see parallels between Esther and Jesus, because like Jesus, Esther put herself in a potentially deadly situation. Fortunately for her, she was approved of by Xerxes. She was approved of by the king of the time. And so her situation did not end up being deadly, but it could have been. It was a great risk to her life to do what she did. And also, like Jesus, Esther interceded for the people, for the Jewish people, in order to save them from physical death. That is just as Jesus is always our intercessor to God to save us from spiritual death. So I've kind of given you an idea of how Esther and Jesus kind of parallel. Obviously not to the same lengths, the same, we'll just say, extremes, but there is parallels. You can see how Esther is like Jesus. And I want us to learn what we can about God through this story. So next week, we'll get started. I'm not sure quite how I'm going to, I'll just say organize it. It's split into 10 days. So I'm not sure if I'm going to do like I did with the last one and kind of split each day into two videos. I haven't decided that yet. We'll have to wait and see how it looks to me as I'm doing it. But regardless, I want us to look, I want us to learn, and I want us to see God's hand in this story, even though God is not specifically mentioned by name. I want us to see how, despite that, this story shows God's power. So as always, I thank you for being here. I hope you will join me for this journey. If I could, I would love to show little snippets of the show, but due to copyright, I don't think I can do that. I would love to. If you happen to see Queen Esther as a show wherever you're at, and if you can, do go see it. It is a wonderful show. But I hope you join me on this journey. And again, I can't thank you enough for all you do for me, all your likes, subscriptions, comments. I love them all, and I appreciate and I get so excited when I see them. So please join me for this journey. And as always, remember that I love you, God loves you, and please remember to love yourselves and those around you. Until next time, my friends, bye.